ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce you to a colleague of mine who'll be speaking here in Denmark while we're here, Ted Wright in the back. He's the executive director of our industry. Ted is an expert in archaeology, so if you have any questions tonight on archaeology, he is your man. Now, before I get started, let me ask you this. How many of you have heard me before, or this is your first time? How many of you are here tonight? Okay, good. I just wanted to check. Is it okay if we have fun tonight? It's a little heavy topic, morality, but I thought I'd start by giving you an overview of the three major arguments that we normally present when we're presenting the evidence for God. There are more than this, but these are the three major arguments for a theistic God. And when I say a theistic God, I mean a being who's beyond the world, who created the world and sustains the world. An immaterial, spaceless, timeless, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent, sustaining cause. That's what I mean by a theistic God. Now, what are some of the evidence for this being? The first argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe known as the cosmological argument. And as you know, cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. It says that the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. We can get scientific evidence for that and philosophical evidence to point out that the universe had a beginning. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument, another Greek word, telos, meaning design or purpose. It says that there's design in life and design in the universe. There must be a designer. And quite frequently, we talk about the fine-tuning of the universe and also the information found in life and the genetic code. The third argument, however, is not scientific at all. It has no scientific evidence behind it. These arguments do. But it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children. And it's the argument we're talking about tonight, the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says that there's one thing morally wrong out there. Like it's morally wrong to torture babies for fun. Or it's morally wrong to murder 6 million people in the Holocaust. Then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no God, if there is no standard beyond humanity, that's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. If there's no objective, unchanging moral authority that establishes really what is right, and any deviation from that would be wrong. That's the argument we're going to concentrate on tonight. If you come to the debate on Thursday, Dennis Normark and myself will be debating. Where are we going to be debating, Jesper?
Gymnasium.
Where?
Hello, Gymnasium.
Okay.
Yeah.
At 7:30,
yeah.
We're going to be debating and going through some of these arguments that night. So if you want the first two arguments, come on Thursday night. But we're going to concentrate here on the moral argument. And let's talk about what we're going to try and do tonight. The first thing we're going to try and do is establish what the argument is. Specifically, what is this argument for God via morality? Then secondly, what's the evidence for this argument? And thirdly, can't we be good without God? Why do we need God anyway? And then if I time this just right, we'll have absolutely no time for questions. Actually, Dr. Kristen said we were going to do Q&A. That's not true. We're going to do Q, no A. Okay? So you can ask all the questions you want, and we'll go, that's good. Next question. But no. We'll try and get to questions as well. So we're going to start right here as what is the argument. You guys ready to go? Yes. All right. This is one way of stating the moral argument for God. The premises go like this. Every law has a lawgiver. There is an objective moral law, therefore there's an objective moral lawgiver. It's quite a simple argument. It's been stated in different ways. But the only candidate for an objective moral lawgiver, somebody who is authoritative and doesn't change, would be what we call a theistic God. Now, it seems that the first premise is true by definition. Every law has a lawgiver. We don't see laws coming from non-lawgivers. The second question, however, is the one we're going to have to talk about. There is an objective moral law. What is the evidence for that? Now, where I come from in America, we had a Declaration of Independence, which occurred in 1776. And in that Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote these words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Jefferson is saying that these rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, these are self-evident. We all know this, and we're endowed by our Creator. These rights come from God. And Jefferson went on to say that governments are instituted among men not to give rights or take them away, but to protect them. And according to Jefferson, he said, when a government usurps the right of its people, it's the people's right to overthrow that government. That's what he thought. And so he said this was self-evident. Now, the Bible actually talks about this self-evident moral law in Romans chapter 2, where Paul says that the Gentiles who do not have the law written on their hearts. And there's been other philosophers, obviously, since Paul that talked about this. John Locke talked about it. And of course, Thomas Jefferson spoke about it. This self-evident moral law. You intuitively know certain things are right and other things are wrong. Where does that come from? According to Jefferson and according to the Apostle Paul, it comes from God. So that's pretty easy to establish what is the argument. Now we're going to spend a lot of time on what's the evidence for this argument. And actually, it's not so much that we're looking at empirical evidence. You really can't look at empirical evidence for a moral law. This is more, you seem to understand that there is a moral law just by reflection, just by intuition. And what is some of the evidence for this intuition that we have? First of all, moral principles are undeniable. We know right from wrong best by our actions, or best by our reactions rather than our actions. For example, if I steal from you, I may not think stealing is wrong, but what do I say the second you steal from me? Hey, there's something wrong here. In fact, this was brought forth beautifully by a professor at a university in America. It was Indiana University. And this professor was teaching a class in ethics, probably much like Dr. Christensen teaches. And he told his class that they could write a paper on anything they wanted to write on. He said, I just have a couple of requirements. It has to be in on my desk by October 15th. It's got to be something related to ethics, and it can't be more than 20 typewritten pages. So there was an atheist in the class who decided he was going to write a paper on the merits of moral relativism. And in this paper he said, there is no right and wrong, it's all a matter of opinion, you like chocolate, I like vanilla, there is no justice or injustice, it's all subjective, it's all a matter of opinion. He handed it in on time, October 15th. It wasn't more than 20 written pages. And he handed it in a beautiful blue folder. And the professor got the paper, he opened it up, he started reading. There is no real right and wrong, it's all a matter of opinion, you like chocolate, I like vanilla. He closed the paper up and he wrote, F, I don't like blue folders. Next class he handed it back to the student. After the class was over, the student stormed up to the professor. He said, F, I don't like blue folders. That is not fair. That is not right. That is not just. The professor said, whoa, hold on, wait, I read a lot of papers. Let me make sure I got your paper right. Isn't your paper the one that said there is no such thing as fairness, there is no such thing as rightness, there is no such thing as justice, it's all a matter of opinion, you like chocolate, I like vanilla? And the student said, yeah, that's right, that's my view. And the professor said, I don't like blue, you get an F. Suddenly the light bulb went off in the student's head. He realized there is a real standard of justice out there. He was complaining to the professor that the professor was judging his paper based on the color of the folder rather than the content of the paper. That's not right, that's not fair, that's not just. So the student reacted to something that was unjust, rightfully so. So you really can't deny it, because as soon as you deny there's something wrong with the way somebody treats you, you're appealing to a moral standard. Secondly, there is no injustice unless there is justice. Now, a few years ago, I had the privilege of traveling across Europe with a couple of my sons and a friend of mine who is the real Indiana Jones. His name is Bob Corniff. You can look him up. Great guy. Anyway, we went across Europe. We started in London. We went to Paris. We went to Normandy. We went across France, through Germany, and we wound up in Berlin. And we visited some Reformation sites, Martin Luther. We also visited, obviously, Normandy. And on the way, we stopped at the Buchenwald concentration camp in Wiedmar, Germany. Many of you have probably been there. In April 1945, the Allies liberated the camp. And they went through the front gate, which is still there. They looked to the right. They saw the crematorium off in the distance, which is still there. When they got down to the crematorium, they looked into the courtroom, or the courtyard attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. Now, if there is no God, this is just a matter of opinion. This is just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. Now, every one of us in here is going, this is just not right. That's an intuitive sense that we have. When we reflect on this, we say, this isn't right. We all know that. In fact, in order for Hitler to get his fellow Germans to do this, he had to dehumanize the Jews. He had to say they were not human, that they were somehow subhuman, because people intuitively understand it's morally wrong to do this to people. Now, in fact, let me ask a question this way. How do you discover who's right and who's wrong? Mother Teresa, of course, the Catholic nun that devoted her life to taking care of the poor in Calcutta, India, and of course Adolf Hitler, the World War II dictator. How can you discover who's right and who's wrong? Well, let me ask you this question. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? What would you need to see in order to know? This is the interactive portion of the program. In order to answer this question, what would you need to see? Go ahead, sir.
How Scotland really looks?
Yes, you'd have to see the real Scotland, right? You'd have to see the real unchanging Scotland to see which map is better. If Scotland does not exist, then these two maps are meaningless. But since Scotland does exist, we can see that map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, we can measure these two maps by the real thing, by the real standard. That's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler was not the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And we say Mother Teresa measured up to the standard better than did Hitler. If the standard didn't exist, then there would be no way to compare Mother Teresa in an objective way. It would just be like trying to compare those two maps of Scotland without an objective referent. There would be no way of doing that. So there has to be a standard outside of Mother Teresa and Hitler in order to make the judgment. Now, C.S. Lewis, who, as you know, wrote profoundly on this topic in his book Mere Christianity, put it this way. He said, the moment you say that one set of moral ideas can be better than another, you are in fact measuring them both by a standard, saying that one of them conforms to that standard more nearly than the other, but the standard that measures two things is something different from either. He went on to say, and as you know, Mere Christianity was originally a series of BBC radio broadcasts during World War II. And he said over the radio, he said, the moment you say that our position is better than the Nazis' position, you're implicitly implying there's a standard beyond both of them. And in fact, he was of course right. There has to be a standard beyond Mother Teresa and Hitler in order to distinguish between either of them. In fact, let's look at it this way. If there is no God, then what the Nazis did was not really wrong. I do a lot of presentations at universities, and a couple of years ago I was at Michigan State University. And during the Q&A, I got talking to a couple of atheists who were sitting on this side of the auditorium. And I said, well, you're atheists, so what is your standard of morality? And one of the atheists said, whatever the majority decides is morally right. So I said, are you telling me that if you lived in Nazi Germany and a majority decided to murder Jews, that would make it morally right? And he paused, he blushed, and he went, yes. And his atheist buddy sitting right next to him looked over at him and yelled, no! The first kid in his heart knew the answer was no, but in order to be consistent with his atheism, he had to say yes. But of course, on atheism, there is no morality. The majority doesn't decide because there is no morality. It's a free-for-all. Whoever has the most power gets to impose his or her view on people, but that's not an objective standard. That's a relative or subjective standard. If there is no God, love is no better than rape, not in an objective way. We may not like rape, but it's just a subjective opinion. If there is no God, there are no human rights. We always talk about human rights. People have a right to X or Y or Z. Not if there's no God. Who's to say we have a right? That's why Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. that all men were endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. We're endowed by our Creator because there's a standard beyond humanity. Otherwise, it's just human beings arguing with one another. If there is no God, religious crusades are not wrong. I had the opportunity to debate Christopher Hitchens a couple of times. I don't know if you know who he was, but he was a brilliant new atheist, wonderful guy, great to listen to. In fact, with his British accent, I could listen to him all day, even though I didn't agree with him. In fact, during our first debate, I was kind of daydreaming. I'm going, wow, this guy just sounds so good. You know? But he rightfully points out in his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, he rightfully points out that religious people have